Hello, hello. So, just kind of a simple chatty video today. I wanted to go through the upcoming Jetburn set and just kind of talk about a bunch of cards because I think the first reaction when we're looking at a new set is to look at all the characters, look at their kits. You know, what kind of Ryukyu deck can I make? What kind of Best Genus deck can I make? What can I do with Inasa? Things like that. But, you know, as I've sort of been looking at the set and poking around different decks, including some older characters, I have noticed that there's really a lot of cards in this set that I think are going to have some impacts outside of just, you know, showing up in their character's kit. So I was thinking of doing like a top 10 kind of thing, but I wound up expanding that to 20. Not a very precise ranking. I'm not going to say, oh my god, the number 18 is more important than 19 or whatever, right? But just 20, just touching on a bunch of cards, I got it down to 20 that I think either will allow some, you know, decks to exist or to be viable that weren't before, right? A new deck archetype, or just a card that can be a missing piece in something, or something you might build around a little bit. Or alternately, some cards that are going to impact the value of other cards, you know, some, you know, new pieces of tech, things like that, you know, there's certainly a bunch of in this set. So, and these are not all of the relevant cards in this set. You know, I've got Ambush Thrust on the screen right now. That's kind of card that's probably going to see some play, but it's not really on this list because it's not... You're probably not going to see any new archetypes built around doing things with Ambush Thrust unless somebody finds some broken loop or something like that. You know, I'm thinking about this live. Ambush Thrust Manifest, maybe? Get 2 Ambush Thrust, get a Manifest in there, maybe you can do something. But no. That's not what I'm talking about here, right? I'm talking about... A lot of these are going to be, you know, rares, ultra secret, but there's some commons and uncommons in here too, of just cards that are build-arounds or sort of important tech pieces to make note of that might change, you know, how good some of the stuff that's just always been good for all of MHA might be, right, for instance. So, without further ado, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on each card. The first card I have on my list is number 5 Pro Hero. It's a little bit fringy because this is almost certainly just going to be a sideboard card outside of your Mirkos and your Minas and your whatnot, but this response, you know, you think about where Faith Shield is good, number 5 Pro Hero is good. You know, people bring Faith Shield to the sideboard and mess up with some matchups. Now you get it on 3 other symbols, and you don't have the barrier of needing to pass this +3 block and hold the foundation in your hand or anything like that. Of course, that means they can snipe it out, etc. But all the stuff Faith Shield was good against, this is good against. It's all kinds of headaches for, you know, the recent punch lamps in particular I'm thinking of. You know, that's 1 less stun on Heroic Strike, that's 1 less card you get to ready with Repeated, that's 1 more card you have to play before you get to combo your Valiant Assaults, things like that. And again, we didn't see a lot of Faith Shield messing with those, because Faith Shield you have to pass the block, right? And then that's sort of not a trivial thing for a lot of decks. You kind of need a lot of good speed reduction to be doing that, and then you need the card economy to hold the card and so on. So it's a much more accessible way to get the flip part of the Faith Shield effect. Also the momentum denial. This card is just as good against Electric Jolt as Faith Shield is, for instance. So yeah, you know, I'd expect to see this card coming in out of sideboards. You know, if you're playing a deck that's kind of exposed to Faith Shield for that face down flipping sorts of reasons, then you may want to think a little bit more about it, because it's not just going to be that 1 card that messes with you. There's going to be a second one running around now. So yeah, keep an eye out for number 5 Pro Hero. The next one I have here is Leag Handler. So this doesn't seem like much in terms of this kind of list, because it's kind of a generically useful card, but I sort of wanted to make the point that a card like this allows 5 and 6-handers and decks without good a card economy to get that extra quote-unquote block against long strings that is often one of the problems with playing, you know, one of those true 6-handers without a lot of card draw, that sort of thing. If you find your Leag Handler, you know, one of your 2 or 3 or however many you're running, then once they get 4 attacks deep, you have this extra sort of automatic block in a way, right? And that could be the difference for some of these symbols between being able to play that 6-hander. I mean, I'm just going to throw Dobby 1 out there as an example of this kind of character. You don't have, you know, he's got some nice effects, but he doesn't on his own draw a lot of cards. You need like Frigid Heatwave and stuff. And so he could be challenged to chain block, but then put a card like Leag Handler in your deck, or any other of the bazillion characters out here that have these quote-unquote 6-hand size problems, and now your defense is a lot better and maybe more viable than it was before. Next up, I have Fiery Vengeance. So this one, there's not a lot of like jump out at your face, obvious places where this is going to live just yet, but the card just seems too good on its face not to find a home somewhere. And the self-clearing nature of it, or just the automatic hit, even just the low block on the all symbol, is something that's relevant right now. Could be the difference in even an all punches and an order punches deck that feels a little bit fringy, but this is sort of has enough check passing grease, has powerful 4 on it, gives you a momentum use besides repeated on order or nothing on all, Detroit Smash. So this could put some of those all in order punch decks over the top. Even fire punches with Rappa stuff, which is not a traditional punch symbol, but this is one more that can go into that kind of package. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some decks that are finding ways to use Fiery Vengeance that take them up from like that B tier to that A tier, that kind of thing. Next one on here is 1000 Sheet Pierce. Obviously this is going to show up in the review themed characters, but also on top of that, I think it's generally useful enough that we might see it in some other places. The Flash on block tech block is potentially very valuable, and it's perfectly fine as an attack. You get to discard 1, draw 2. We're very happy to do that. No strings attached. And if you're doing kooky stuff, you might even want to give your own attack flash, right? But this is one to keep an eye out for. Again, going back to Leag Handler and how there are decks out there that have just traditionally struggled with card economy that might welcome a card like that. This is sort of in that space too. You want to build a fire deck, but you can't really do the range thing because of some specific thing you're trying to do. And 1000 Sheet Pierce lets you see those couple extra cards, or perhaps a Void deck is maybe more likely to have this predicament, like a Void 6-hand size type character. And yeah, it's the 2-check, but if it brings your deck together, then it could be worth running. So don't be surprised if you see this card show up in more than just the lurkers. Next, the new number 1, and I want to call this one out because there aren't too many foundations like this in MHA where it's a reusable defensive ability that is a bomb against the right deck. So Spooky's one of them. There are not too many others. So the new number 1, E-Commit, Return to Printed Speed. Not hyper relevant against every deck, but there's a bit of a history of decks where their game plan has been like, well, I'm going to play a 10-speed move, one or two 10-speed moves every turn, and sooner or later you're not going to be able to reset them anymore. Right? Even the World Championship winning Midnight had some of this going on. We've seen Life Deku 4 decks that are doing this, and the new number 1 is a piece that can sit there and really get in the way of that kind of game plan in a way that we haven't really had a card like that before in MHA only. And then, of course, could be driving people to play some pro heroes if they're worried about seal effects, if they want the extra defense. This sort of thing. Obviously, Endeavor 3's face is on it, but it could move people on in Earth or Fire. To play like an Endeavor 2 instead of whatever good stuffy student they were playing, right? I think this is one of the relatively few character type abilities that could actually drive somebody to play, I'm going to play a hero instead of a villain. I'm going to play a hero instead of a student. So I think this card's going to have an impact. It'll be interesting to see how many copies those decks decide to run, especially if you are playing a pro hero so you can play this card. You're really just going to 1x it, right? Maybe people even 3x it. It has a fine block on it, right? But I'll be interested to see where this card shows up. Next on, Frog Hop. This is, pretty straightforward. It's a build around, right? Passing the checks, if, even, you probably need to have at least one pool clear just up front. But that's not only Asui 3 that gets to do this. You have characters like Ochako 1 could play Frog Hop with a straight face and maybe do some things with it. Has the little character committed bonus. I don't have a whole lot of specific ideas for this yet. I haven't thought about it too much, but it's one of those things I wouldn't be surprised at all to see decks that, sort of the way you had decks that are like, I want to win with Meteor Shower. Well, instead of needing momentum and the cards in your discard pile, you just need the Frog Hops in your discard pile, but it's contingent on landing it. But if you have a scarier enough follow-up, We'll talk about some... There's obviously other scary high attacks on air and water, even just in this set. It could, you know, really support that kind of gameplay and be that extra angle besides the other stuff you're doing that can tie a deck together. What's next? What's next? Flustered! So, you know, very simple card, but it can certainly drive some decks on these symbols. You particularly think about water very often feels pushed into ranged to get Frigid Heatwave. Well, now if you have enough charges, you can get away from the range stuff. You can play Flustered, still have a little card draw on your deck, and some momentum hate. You know, I'm trying to think. I don't think all three of these symbols... Earth obviously has boat tons of momentum hate, right? Air and water, I mean, water's had making a stand. I might be forgetting something, but this is also, you know, relevant in terms of giving a couple symbols momentum hate that have been pretty thin on it historically. So this, you know, it's going to warp some deck building. I think you'll still see some, you know, traditional water ranged packages. Air was kind of already on a lot of charges, but you'll see them lean into that maybe even a little more. I cannot tell you what charges Earth has besides the ones with Ochako's face on them, but they're probably out there, right? It's going to lead people, on Earth and Water mainly to go see what they can find on the charge front, and maybe get to try and run this card. Next one, Zero Gravity Rush. This is another build around. A bunch of these cards are just going to be kind of build arounds. I've seen people slamming this into Amajiki, which is pretty funny. The obvious use case is Nomu, but I think you're going to see a non-trivial number of decks where part of their game plan is going to be, I'm going to have 2, 3, possibly even 4 if we're really all in on it, Zero Gravity Rush, and part of my threat package is going to be, here's my 8-speed high for 8. Or my 10-speed high for 10 or whatever. And I'm going to be doing other things, right? This isn't what we're not going to lean on this solely to win games, right? But we're going to have it in there. It's going to be a threat. It's going to be a good addition to our diversity. Another something that they might save their resets for, so that we get to sort of do our other stuff relatively unharassed, things like that. So yeah, again, similar to Frog Hop, don't be surprised if you see some Zero Gravity Rush decks floating about with God knows what character from whatever era of MHA Spotlight. They're kind of, there's possibilities all over the place, really. The next one, Defending Pageant Queen. Very simple. It's a speed reset plus for symbols. The evil symbol in particular, I want to say, has been really wanting for a card like this, because as good as Citywide Crisis is, it is a unique... It's a 2/4. People often try to like 1 exit or 2 exit. Don't pack too many copies in their sideboard, so you can feel a little bit exposed to lots of speed on the evil symbol. Well, now we have this, right? All on Earth already kind of had yours so obvious, but there is quite a difference between printed speed and 1 speed. You give up the damage reset flexibility, you give up some of the like using on your own attack flexibility. But I could see some decks doing like 2/2 splits, 2 of this, 2 yours so obvious, and that way you get a lot of reset power if you feel like you really need it in the format, but you're not, all inning on either one of the cards. But yeah, this is obviously a card like this is going to be impactful. It's going to be out there. It's one more thing to think about if you're leaning on Zero Gravity Rush, right? And other, I'm going to land my really fast move. Well, now there's another reset on top of, there's the Best Genus one, of course, but that's a little less, huge. It's a little more like some other resets. This one's different, but there's more resets around in general to be thinking about if you want to go for that kind of game plan. Next, Incredible Display. Responses can be cancelled now without an action card. Puts a value on momentum for decks that... Chaos decks are usually going to have a way to use momentum. Same with Life Punch decks anyway, but nonetheless, sometimes you build a deck and you're like, wow, I don't really have a great way to use momentum. Incredible Display is a great way to use momentum on any of these symbols. More card economy for, Life doesn't really need it. Chaos sometimes needs it, depending on the character. Earth very often needs it. So that's going to be very important if Earth can find enough decently blocking foundations anyway to play and pull them back with this card. Obviously a strong card. I think it's going to shift some power levels around. If you're looking at a character and some different symbols you could play them on. Even in a world where Capture Evildoers isn't around anymore, if that happens by any chance, then I imagine Ryukyus are going to want to play off of not all so that they can play this almost primarily, right? It's that good of a card that it's going to kind of drive some decks to play different symbols to get access to this. Next we have Hero's Upbringing. This is another close to a pure sideboard card, but a big enough deal. You know, defensive character Shutdown has not existed in this format, and now it does. It's very pricey, it's very limited. There's only so many characters that it's really good against, but if you are planning to play one of those, then you need to be aware of this, because people will be sideboarding it, at least early on in the format until things shake out. If you want to play a Jiro, you want to play a Todoroki 4, ironically, characters like that, you should probably think about action hate. You should think about cards like Incredible Display, you know, the response hate, because you might need to bail yourself out against this guy. Next, Air Force Style. This is, I don't know how many decks we're going to see main decking this that aren't Deku 5. You can play some of his foundations and play this with a straight face and just try to make it happen even if you're not on that character, because a couple of his foundations that ready your opponent's stuff are just fine. But nonetheless, I would not be surprised at all to see it in some sideboards, because there's a lot of readying foundations right now, right? Whether it be obviously a repeated smash, you have your small and limber decks out there, you have decks that are just running requesting assistance, things like that. The stun response foundations that just ready themselves. I could see this coming in those situations to try to snipe some of those out, or even just be main deck, because it does, you know, if you're playing keyword abilities, which most decks are going to have, you know, their little breakers, their token stuns, whatever, this can be a passing the torch. It can just turn sideways and draw a card, right? So this is really a very main deckable card, you know, more so than it looks like on its face. Like, oh, how often is the flip going to be useful? Chances are one of these two abilities is going to be relevant. And deck space is hard, right? Every card looks good until you try to fit it into a 62 card deck, right? But this is one you have to be mindful of if you're, you know, still in the habit of just slamming for requesting assistance in every deck on those symbols. You're, oh, like I'm going to build this deck around small and limber. Well, now there's a pretty direct answer to that sort of stuff, right? So you're going to have to be thoughtful about that, you know, as you're evaluating some stuff that has traditionally been quite good. Next card is Velocity Rush. This is probably the best, at least the best 3-check Echo card that we've seen to date. It has normal stats. It is a 4 difficulty, 4 high 4 with a couple little stat bonuses on it. You know, if it did not have Echo, this card would be thoroughly mediocre, but it has Echo. And so for these symbols, you know, again, getting back to card economy, getting back to your check passing power, passing a long string, Echo helps with that. This shares 2 symbols with Twin Sword Slicer, which is another really good 4/3 Echo attack. So you could see more good symbol or void symbol Echo-based approaches. There's also Double Trouble, of course, but some people don't like the 2-speed mid, right? So the idea of using Echo to secure your kill is gonna... We've seen it get a little bit more viable late in the Undaunted Raid format, with Scott Sunman's All-for-One deck, with the good symbol Momo deck, and this is really leveling up those kinds of strategies. So in addition to being a draft first pick, you know, at least out of the common pool, I would expect this to make a constructed splash as well, and more than just Jiro, which is sort of an obvious place to put it. Next, Fierce Wings. Not a lot to say about this card that hasn't already been said. It is, at worst, an Omniblock, right? Worst case scenario, this thing goes and picks up... this can go pick up plus Ultra. But this goes and picks up whatever zone block you're looking for, puts it in your hand, block the thing with it. When a card has that kind of a floor, it's pretty easy to include a pair or a 3 or more in your deck. Never mind the response remove. That can build any non-unique foundation. There aren't too many non-unique foundations that are high difficulty, but I think of No Time to Waste as a card that might see a little bit more play in decks that are running Fierce Wings, as one example. And yeah, you'll probably see some decks that, you know, are not quite Nezu level toolboxy, but decks that want to get pretty toolboxy. You might see 3 or 4 Fierce Wings and 3 1x action cards, and they just use Fierce Wings to go get whichever one they're looking for, right? Trying to do their best Dobby 2 impression, but without the symbol restrictions. This can go if you're if you're one of those evil decks that really relies on brute strength. You can use Fierce Wings to go find your brute strength if you haven't found it yet. Card's nuts. Card is very, very flexible. It's not on a whole other level than I Am Here is, but it's going to have the same kind of thing where people trying to fit it into their decks are going to be like, okay, well, what does this mean when I'm counting? How many can I play more actions than usual because one of them is this thing is just going to turn into something else, right? But I expect in time, as the format matures, we're going to see more and more of this card, unless the symbols are just deemed not very good or whatever, right? Tasty Rift. Yeah, I think people who have been watching streams have probably seen more than their fair share of this card already. You are going to be seeing decks that, beyond just Jiro, are really leaning into this card. Not only as, its floors, it's a 2-check back alley. If it hits, you draw 3 cards and then discard down to your hand size. So if this is, say, your second attack, you draw 3, discard 1 on hit. If it's your second attack and you spend a card on something else, you're just drawing 3 cards. This is such a huge must-block threat that not only is it going to drive some decks to be playing this, to be playing the, putting the 2-check into their deck, trying to hunt for some card draw, especially if they have some pool clear in their deck to keep playing those drawn cards, right? It's to the old Capture Evildoers thing. But also, when you're building decks, you have to be aware that if you run into a Tasty Rift, I mean, there's plenty of very good high attacks, especially in this set, but there are cards like this that are just, if you don't block this, it can get really bad. Kinds of high attacks floating around. And this is one of the biggest ones. So, when you're thinking about your block zones, we've come off of a format where it's like, okay, well, make sure you can block low spam because you might face a mirror that plays nothing but low attacks. Well, now, with this and with some other things, some other cards coming up, you gotta start thinking about high attack spam decks too. I mean, some of the Frog Hops we were talking about earlier, the Zero Gravity Rush, also sort of lead themselves to this putting the pressure on the high zone type of strategy, and this is one more in that line. And in addition, these Tasty Rift decks may randomly be playing a Jiro's Guitar or some of Jiro's attacks that make some applause tokens just to get that little synergy going. So it's going to direct some decks in that way. Next up, Hell Spider. And this one's been talked about a bunch. Probably the second pick common in the draft. If you don't have the Velocity Rush Echo move in your pack and you don't have any rares or whatever you want to draft, you're probably taking this. If you haven't sorted out your symbols yet, right? But yeah, just good stats. It is not uncommon, at least for me, to build a deck, and it sounds really good. Everything I'm thinking about sounds great on paper, and then when I start putting the attack lines together, I'm like, well, I have 3 5-diff attacks that I like, and 1 4-diff on these symbols. And now Hell Spider is that additional good 4-diff, evergreen, never bad. Unless you're really keyword gating, you can kind of just put this in anything, and it's going to be pretty good for you. And it can allow some deck ideas that maybe couldn't quite come together before because their difficulty curves were too high or whatever, or they had to play some, cute utility 4-diffs that weren't really carrying their weight. Hell Spider's going to slide right in there, and it's going to allow some decks to exist. You could see some order decks I've been looking at a little bit with the Featherstorm, which got just off this list, and Hell Spider in it, just sort of, now I have 2 speed on everything, right? You find some damage and you're good to go. 4th on our list, Falling Skies, obviously. It doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. This card is silly. It is one of the things that is going to drive decks on these symbols to do this only highs or mostly highs kind of game plan. I mean, you don't need too many. Falling Skies is the only one in your card pool, it's still a 4 high 6. But you probably want to have at least one other high, get that 5 high 7 throw kind of thing going on. It is a charge throw effectively, so you might see some decks that if you need to deal damage with charge moves, Falling Skies slots in and does that. I've fiddled around with the idea of putting it in Todoroki 1, even though it's not ranged, just because, hey, you just put 1 billion damage on a throw, right? There have been Todoroki decks in the past that have sort of gotten by on tape swings and grasping tape tosses, and now there's the Asui Throw, now there's this that he can play, so you might see some decks like that, or some air charge throw decks with 0 gravity lift on top of this, that sort of thing. But yeah, just, air, earth, and water have gotten a lot out of these Ochako cards. There's another one we're going to talk about later too, as well as sprinkled in from the other kits. So, again, like I said about some other cards, be ready for the possibility of a high overload now, being a little bit more common than it was in the previous format. Next up, Surprising Skill. This card is... It looks like it's anti-seal, and, it kind of is. You can respond to a seal, you get a little something out of it. You might stun them 1 or whatever. Like, that can be pretty good, especially if that seal is like a turn 2 irrefutable. You can flip the Surprising Skill and then, go ahead and knock out 1 more foundation, make the commit 2 to get that seal off. But the real big thing this card is doing is answering point committal. Ironically, with Denki on the card, that this really does a lot to Electric Jolt. Right, this turns Electric Jolt's face-up momentum effect into flip Surprising Skill in a way that we certainly haven't seen on a 0 diff. We've had it on some 2 diffs. I remember Garrett at the Ratchet PC was 4xing getting a tour to do this, and now you have Surprising Skill doing this at a 0 diff, right? Also, stun proof. They can't stun this down if it's your last foundation, and that's pretty cool too. But mainly, the big takeaway is that decks are going to be running this card, and so your Chimera Krakens, your Electric Jolts, your point committal sort of stuff, you're going to want to think about either overloading on it, right, so you can power through one of these and still get some point commits off, or maybe you try to trim it and find some other ways to deal with foundations, because Surprising Skill is really going to get in the way of some of those point committal plans. Next up, Airy Smiles. This is one of the cards that's been... at the top of this list is stuff that's really been taking up my headspace lately. I really want to play this card. Yeah, it's a highly disruptive, cheerful uppercut level block on 3 symbols that haven't had a lot of that, if any of that, on air all in good. So now decks on those symbols are suddenly going to be able to do some disruption that they haven't had access to before. Outside of maybe the occasional Breaker 1, maybe max for some of these decks. I think there's all has Chronostasis trigger, I guess, if you also have Evil on your character. So yeah, you're going to have to watch out for this card. It is a high block, which clearly is very good, as we've been talking through this video. It does have that... The token flip foundation cost is kind of interesting that that's there. I think a lot of people aren't going to think about that, and they're going to play this and be like, oh, I have to flip something, but nonetheless, very good. Certainly... most plainly strong against Tokoyami, right? Decks that are boosting the next checks. It's I'm not sure if Gentle boosts his next attack deck specifically, or if this just messes with him too. Any combo stuff, again, all the stuff that Cheerful Uppercut is good against without the caveat of having to play decent 5/3 attack and having to possibly partially block if they're a high-heavy lineup. In this case, it is an action card. You do have to put it in your deck. Its second ability is kind of niche. If you're not like scouting your deck or something, then you might just check a 3 on this, be like, okay, well, I missed, right? But it is in a sense, almost guaranteeing that your next check is a 5, which will have its uses, right? But mostly it's just here to be a special block, and it's going to be pretty good at it, and you should probably be cognizant of this card the same way, as much, if not even more. A Showdown's also in this format, right? And so that's 6 symbols that have a high block that can kind of blow you out. So, in tandem with all the high attack stuff, we have some high blocks lurking around. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. The last card I want to bring up, the one that's been really taking up a lot of my mind space, is Quick Response. Yeah, more play high attacks cards. Again, Ochako 4 symbols, air, earth, and water. Really, those 3 symbols just getting a lot this set, especially if you're willing to lean into this highs theme. And again, like some of the other ones, you don't have to play mono highs to do this. You can be mostly highs and still get a lot out of this card. We've had a couple of foundations that have functionally given 2 speed to all of your moves, right? One of them is banned, And the other one mostly still exists because stun hate helps against it, and there's a lot of stun hate out there. And those cost cards out of your hand, which are sometimes a little more free than destroying foundations if you're just going to do it on like a poke turn or something, but in terms of a kill turn, this is a much easier cost to be able to keep paying if you're really going in. And One with Nature got banned for this, right? So definitely keep an eye out on this card. Obviously, the one thing that is true is you don't get to... You could play One with Nature and Brute Strength, right? And be destroying, burning both ends, from your hand and from your stage, and you don't get to do that here. This is sort of your foundation that is going to be blowing stuff up. You're probably not going to be blowing up 2 foundations in every attack unless you're really rich. And there aren't too many ways to just discard cards for damage or anything like that on these symbols. There's Prone to Dry Eyes. Play a Water Prone to Dry Eyes quick response deck. That'll probably kill somebody. Yeah, I would be very, very, very surprised if there are not a pretty healthy number of quick responses in some of the first top cuts in this format. This card is really good at breaking down a defense if left unanswered, and it has a token deadlock on it that's kind of alright, right? You're playing these high attacks all game, and then suddenly you can start messing around and making them low or pretending like you're going to and then not, that sort of thing, the whole Mirio stuff. So yeah, quick response. So the last card maybe doesn't look like the biggest, highest impact card in this set, but I think there's a chance that it will be. So I put it up top of the list here. And that's all I have for today. So obviously there's plenty more good cards in this set besides these. And this is all just talking character agnostic, right? Most of these cards that I bring up are not about being played in like the character that their face. They're obviously good in the character whose face is on it, but they're good in plenty of other places. So there's plenty of other cards like that are in this set, in addition to cards that are just going to be good role players that are going to show up a lot, that are going to do some things, but they might not drive deck building the way that I think some of these cards will. So yeah, Jetburn, really looking like a pretty good set, especially once you get beyond the surface level of just looking at the characters and saying, do I like this character, do I like this character? There's really a lot here to work with, and I hope people have fun with it. So stay tuned over the coming days for box opening video, where I'll probably talk about a bunch of these cards again as I'm opening the packs. And we are getting the November ban list update on Tuesday as well, so I'll probably sneak in a news video after that, and we'll take it from there. Till then, have a good night.